Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazal Ministries podcast.
Hello, friends. Hello, fellow geekologists. We are recording and coming to you live in person in Rock Hill, South Carolina at Grace Lutheran Church, an event where sometimes Systematic Geekology hosts come together in person just to make sure that each of us are real human beings and not just faces across the screen on Zoom or Zencastr or whatever we record on, and that Joshua forces us to use so that he can edit better, but we're very thankful for. Hey, I'm Will Rose. I'm one of your hosts. We did vote. I'm Will Rose, one of your hosts from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I traveled all the way to South Carolina to see my friends so we can do this in-person event. Sometimes we come together at Comic-Cons. Sometimes we meet each other on the road at restaurants or breweries. Sometimes we call each other. Sometimes we FaceTime each other. But then once or twice a year, we come together in person to hang out with each other because we like each other sometimes. And most times we like each other and sometimes like our opinions on things. But yeah, we're excited to do this in-person event, and we'll get to our episode and what we're actually going to talk about in a moment. Right now, I just want to introduce the people who are here and what host could make it today. And so we're going to start way down on my right here. Elizabeth, who are you and where are you coming from? What are you geeking out on?
Charleston, South Carolina. I think I drove the furthest to be here, so you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
He came from Kentucky, you know.
Okay, but you live in North Carolina.
But he drove from Louisville.
But you would have been here for the summer anyway.
Nope. He was in Louisville.
Okay, fine. Well,
or Louisville.
There you go. So my last few comments are being vilified.
That you still got to stay with your, and I got to stay with your family. So yeah, coming from Charleston, South Carolina, geeking out. Fairy Tale has come. 100-year quest. We're here.
Oh, there you go. Awesome. We're glad you're here. Glad you traveled all the way from Charleston, South Carolina. Although it's the same state, I had to cross state borders to get here, but I'm glad I'm here. Christian, you're next.
I drove the furthest, being that I was in Louisville for seminary, even in summer school. So, but we did drive down from my parents' place in Charlotte. Pang and I, she stayed the night there, so she was very gracious enough to do that for my sake. What am I geeking out on?
Yeah.
Last night, Pang and I watched with my dad Princess Mononoke and had a really good time doing that. It's a Studio Ghibli film. What is Studio Ghibli is like Nausicaa, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, very fun animated movies that have been dubbed into English now.
Nice. Cool. That's for those who, we have a wide spectrum of audience who geek out on many things. They may want to know who this. Hello. Again, I'm Will Rose, and I'm geeking out on a new trailer for Captain America: Brave New World just dropped, and I did not know that was coming. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. I knew they were inspired by the Holy Spirit. I knew that was on the docket for later on, but didn't know it was going to debut the trailer, and didn't know when it was going to come out in February. I think Valentine's Day. So all the geeks out there who want to go on a Valentine's date to go see Captain America, there might be a disturbance in the force with couples across the nation about whether that's a legit date or not, but or romantic enough.
I've already talked these things through.
Okay.
If I take the 13th off, which is when it will actually be in theaters.
True. The day before.
Then I am also required to take the 14th off
to be with my wife because she needs to be at least as important as Captain America, supposedly.
Yeah. That voice you're hearing is our leader and editor and the person who helped put all this together, not only this day, but also Systematic Geekology. So, Joshua, who are you? What are you geeking out on? Try to stay on track.
I won't.
Okay, go for it.
Joshua Noel. I drove the least far to get here. It's slightly closer than work. Yeah, it's pretty nice. It was, to be fair, there weren't many places that was equally close to people. I forget that you're in Louisville. When we first did this, I thought you were going to be home for the summer, and then TJ was going to be here, and this was pretty close to middle for everyone except for me, which is convenient. But
and Elizabeth and I coming from different state or different sides coming, we're about equal.
Y'all were going to have to drive. Someone was going to drive that.
Someone's going to drive. Yeah,
might as well be both.
Cool. What are you geeking out on, Joshua?
So Eminem just dropped a new album on Friday.
Cool.
Death of Slim Shady.
Ooh. Will there be a resurrection?
It is. I can't. Yes, there will be a resurrection.
Okay.
I also can't decide how I feel about it. He finally crossed that line of like so controversial that I'm not sure I'm okay with it. Like
finally,
I'm not sure.
What?
There's a line.
There's another episode. There's
it
another
turns
episode.
out there's a line, and I think he might have crossed it.
Oh boy.
So I think me and John Early will be talking about this, or have already talked about it on YouTube before this comes out. Unsure. There's a lot of stuff, but the reason I have to bring it up is he does advocate for all reading counts because he talks about how he read comics to increase his vocabulary.
Oh,
and if you didn't know, Eminem is the only rap artist that is studied at Harvard because of how great his vocabulary is. So there you go.
Dang. All right. So there's your tie-in to Systematic Geekology and comics, graphic novels, rap, hip
I have
hop.
a question though.
Okay, here we go. First Uno reverse card coming.
How you mentioned we recorded in person, and there's one person in the audience. How could people be that one person in the audience? Do you know how they got an invite?
How do they get an invite?
How did Austin get an invite?
Hello, Austin.
If you've been a patron, even if you're no longer a patron, I usually just send out the invite because you never know why someone can no longer support. So it's kind of like, hey, if you try to support us, we try to invite you.
There you go, folks. Yeah. There you go. And So I did create an outline for this episode, and we have had our meds. Some of us have had our meds and coffee, so hopefully we'll stay on track. But since we're together in person, there's an unpredictability and improv nature to what we're getting ready to do.
Improbability drive?
Improbability. There could be some things that happen that give us off the rail, but we do have a topic, and our topic today: fantasy stories, our favorite fantasy stories, what makes a fantasy story, the importance of fantasy stories in our fandom, and how that applies to our faith and all those things. So Joshua already has his hand raised, but I have an outline, so I'm going to keep going because he's the one who has to edit this. Joshua, that's the third time you've raised your hand. What is it?
I have to challenge someone on the panel before we start. Elizabeth said before we recorded she's not really into fantasy stories, but then proceeded to talk about Ghibli films, and absolutely every Ghibli film is a fantasy story.
Reading fantasy stories.
Oh, okay.
Okay, clarification.
Every single Ghibli movie should be in its original language, read with subtitles.
So funny you should bring that up, Joshua, because the first question we have for this outline is how do we define a fantasy story? Before, I think it's important to define terms. So if somebody asks me like, Will, do you believe in God? Like, well, what do you mean by God? Will, are you Christian? What do you mean by Christian? So are you a geek or do you love Star Wars? What do you mean by those things? So let's define those terms first. So fantasy is a broad general term and genre. And so, let's take just a few moments to decide what we mean when we say fantasy stories. And I'm going to go first to Christian, who is actually an author that you can pick up his books and find online. And there may be a donor out there who will give him a ton of dough just so he can write the rest of his life. That would be awesome. And I think he's even written some fantasy stories. So I want to go to him first. How does he define the fantasy story? So it could be reading, it could be watching, it could be audio, it could be video games, broad. But how do you define fantasy stories?
That's a difficult question. I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as possible. I would define fantasy as anything extra normal of our reality. And that's why there's things like urban fantasy, is that where you have magic and there can be dragons and fairies and such like that, because that's extra normal to our world where we have not proven such things exist. But your typical fantasy is going to be in a lower technology kind of setting where magic is rampant, where magical beasts roam the area. You don't really know if you're safe if you're heading outside. because there's bandits in the real world, but there could also be a dragon and monsters. Just trying to figure out what's going on there. So that's simple.
Could you for my sake kind of explain, because I know there is differences between high fantasy, low fantasy, fiction, and horror. So if you had to make differences in those, how would you define them?
High fantasy is like mostly, and I'm probably going to butcher this, is like a lot of magic, a lot of things that are beyond the normality of our world. Your lower fantasies, you could argue for Game of Thrones being a low fantasy in some respects. There's magic, but it's not commonplace. It's not like something everyone can engage with. It's something that either was huge at one time and has now died off, or is very small.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what distinguishes other fiction from fantasy? I feel like it could be very vague, as in, I once told a story about Will going to a Duke game because he likes Duke, and that's clearly fiction, but I don't think that classifies as fantasy.
There's demons there.
Blue ones too.
Blue demons.
Yeah. So sorry, restate the question. I'm sorry.
Fiction versus
Fiction versus fantasy is like, making up something is one thing, but then actually building up a magic system, building up how the world has to deal with something extra normal makes it more fantastical in a setting. And even like Star Wars being an example of science fantasy for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I didn't include that in my list because Return of the Jedi would just win. So I had to recuse myself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyone else?
Elizabeth, how would you define it? What's in your mind? When someone says fantasy, what's something that comes to your mind, or like, how would you define that if they were going to ask you? Your next place of work, someone says, hey, what do you mean by fantasy?
2 words, outside reality.
Outside reality.
That's it.
Hold up. So if someone has a different theology than you, their theology is just fantasy?
Yeah. Well, what's their theology?
Could be.
Muslims. The Muslim belief is fantasy.
Well, that's their reality, though.
So how do you define reality?
Like outside, like the normal reality, like wizards or dragons, this doesn't exist.
The physics, the natural scientific physics of the world we live in. So if they lived in a world where, the gravity was off, or
their belief is their reality. I'm not saying not outside your belief, but the reality of like
we'll get to that in a minute. Don't push back yet. We'll get back to your.
For example, if you went to a Duke's game, that's not so outside of reality.
Right.
Like he could realistically.
I don't know how well you know Will.
If literally blue demons jumped out and like attacked people in the crowd, which could happen, that would be outside of reality. I don't think that's going to happen. What if I go to a Duke game? But you never know. All right. Before we get to my little definition, Joshua, how about you? How would you define fantasy?
I mostly like Christians. I think that really the only things for me that define it or differentiate it from fiction, because I feel like that's the important thing to talk about, because we could include so many things if we're just doing fiction. I think fantasy requires the element of magic in some form or way.
Supernatural. Yeah that's not
I
reality, what Elizabeth just said.
I would not count the show Supernatural as fantasy. Well, I guess it could, because it does have magic too,
and horror elements.
That one's closer to horror than fantasy, maybe. Unsure.
There's a Venn diagram. They overlap.
Magic, for sure. There's got to be like a magic system, some kind of spells, those kind of things. I would also think it would have to have creatures we know or are pretty darn sure aren't real. So a Bigfoot story would not count, regardless of how much I don't believe in Bigfoot, because it's within the possibility of reality. Whereas no one pretends that fairies are real, or that unicorns fly and poop rainbows. So stories with those, I fall more into.
Let's go to Iceland. I think you're right. I was reflecting on this question with my wife, because she's a language and literacy professor and teaches reading. We're thinking about stories in general. And so when I Google like top 50 or top 100 fantasy stories of all time, things like Arabian Nights, Mary Poppins, Peter Pan, fairy tales came up. You have the fantasy of, like, of course, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, Narnia, Game of Thrones, those kinds of things. But you also, even people put A Wrinkle in Time in there. Even though it has some science fiction, there's some fantasy, magical elements, magical beings, angels / things. So there's a broad term in terms of how they define fantasy. And then you can get into the nuance of what makes a fantasy story, like high fantasy, low fantasy, swords, magic, wizards. I think the kind of godfather of fantasy in terms of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings was building on other aspects in terms of mythology and the realities of how to explain the universe through fantasy mythological stories and elements. So there's a Venn diagram there. It's a broad term, and there's certain stories that we'll lean into that help kind of solidify what we think that means. So our listeners, our followers, if you disagree with us or you have a better definition that you'd like to share with us, I know Elizabeth and Christian, I won't push back. Joshua he might argue with you, but I will. We'll accept.
I'll argue for fun.
Argue for fun. We will accept what you have to say, and please, we want you to be part of the conversation as well. Come aboard. Let us know what you think. So, all right. We also know, going to the next part of what our topic today, we know that Christians particularly have a long, complicated history when it comes to fantasy, because we get nervous when things get outside our reality or worldview or push back on magic, sometimes rightfully, sometimes unfounded. So what I want to do is kind of go down the line, and you have 30 seconds. I don't have a timer. Elizabeth will help us. Austin, help us with the 30 seconds, okay? Set your timer, and you're going to point at us or yell at us if we go over 30 seconds. And I'm going to start with Joshua because it's going to be hardest for him. Make a 30-second case on why Christians should engage with fantasy stories, however we define that genre and how we understand it. Austin, hit the timer. Go. Joshua.
Fantasy is just a reimagining of reality to help you better build the constructs and understand it in a different context. For example, a lot of your Bible stories, especially apocalypse ones, are just fantasy, probably including the book of Daniel. Sorry, Christian.
Oh, nice. All right. How many seconds was that, Austin? 15. Nice. So now
other fantasy stories in the Bible include Job, lots of Genesis, the book of Revelation.
Yeah. I know. No, I won't. I'll follow up with that in a minute. Okay. Boom. Yeah. There's your alarm. Your time is up. Elizabeth, we'll let you go now. You have 30 seconds. My guess is that you probably won't need all 30 seconds. You may have like a couple sentences and
Why
drop.
should Christians read?
Yeah. Why should make the case of like if someone's like, I don't know, I'm a little weary of wizards and witches and dragons. Isn't that idolatry? Am I going to go into witchcraft and pull me away from God? But what is the way that can make a case for why Christians should read like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, maybe even Game of Thrones?
Oh, because by acknowledging it's fantasy, you acknowledge it does not exist. So I feel if you tell your kids the tooth fairy is real, what's the difference of you watching Harry Potter?
Ooh.
So there's a line you have to draw. So if you know your belief system and you can handle it, fantasy not only helps you escape a little bit of reality, it produces less anxiety. There's a lot of health benefits in it. And it really is just a fun way to interact with something that is not normal.
I like that. And if you're listening with your kids in the car, we're sorry if you still believe the tooth fairy.
Like there's a line.
I'm not sorry, Timmy.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I'm just letting Timmy Turner know. I'm no longer
Timmy.
sorry.
Timmy.
I know what the secret wish was, and you deserve to know the fairy isn't real.
All right. No follow
Also,
up.
at the end of this,
Yeah.
I'd like to plug something.
Okay, you can. Christian, here you go. Austin, set that timer. 30 seconds. Elizabeth nailed it. Here we go.
Well, I'd argue God himself is a creative being, and he's imbued us with a creative aspect. And for those people who are able to create stories around that, it's worthy of being looked into. Like, not every fantasy story out there is worthy of reflecting creation. I will put it that way. But ultimately, most of them are good. They teach you good versus evil. Good will win in the end. You're supposed to fight against monsters. You're supposed to fight against oppression and evil. And is that not what the Bible says about those things? Can you not get that from another source? I say go for it.
Incredible timing. Incredible timing.
Incredible timing. I don't know if I'll need 30 seconds. I'm just going to say ditto to my fellow co-hosts here. But yeah, if we're creating the image of God, I doubt that like God looks like me with like 2 ears and a bald head and like nostrils. But I think in terms of how to be a creative being and a co-creator in creation, and part of that is story. Part of that is how does my story impact others, good over evil? I think fantasy stories help us in our imagination and make believe experiment and play in the sandbox and look in the mirror of how we understand our world and ourselves and identity. And so I think these imaginary tales help us in all that.
What I wanted to plug was part of why I wanted us to do fantasy for one of our episodes in person, because we do this once a year. We get in person with just the host, basically. Wasn't planned. Last year, we thought we were going to have lots of people. Then we were like, hey, you know what? This is just a host thing, and that's fine. We'll also invite patrons and Captivate and Apple Podcast. Anyway, the reason we want to do fantasy, though, because we do have another event this year. We're going to Theology Beer Camp 2024 in Denver, Colorado.
There you go.
And one of the big themes is fantasy this year. So you notice all the stuff for Theology Beer Camp is all Lord of the Rings coded, and they even have why can't I remember? Is it Kevin Max? Is that his name?
From DC Talk?
Yeah, from him for DC Talk's going to be there. And if you didn't know, his last album that he released solo, that wasn't a Christmas album, was titled Fantasy. Great album. Also explores a lot of the stuff we're talking about, why fantasy is important. If you want to just like get meaning out of your song, you can listen to The Last Unicorn and go, wow, he just really believed that one day there'll be a last unicorn. Or you could listen to a commentary on what reality is and how we should treat reality. And I think it's good stuff.
Yeah. And I agree. I think he's a huge, from what I hear from mutual friends, is that a huge Tolkien fan, Lord of the Rings, Dune, love those big epic stories. And that's kind of what we do here at Systematic Ecology. We process and read these stories, and we look at it with a critical eye, what we love, what we don't love, what we think it does to help shape our faith and our life and our communities and relationships. And I think fantasy is another genre and avenue by which can serve as a tool to help us think through the deeper questions that we all wrestle with in life. So fantasy is a big part of that. And I think Christians as a whole have like, in terms of pushback against like Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, those kinds of things, but also okay with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, is because they're looking at it from a certain point of view, and you can see their Christian faith geared and shining through those stories where others may not be as much. But I think they're the general themes of good versus evil, ethics, how do we treat our neighbor, what's the governing rules and moral compass that guides these people in these stories, I think is pretty important for us to think through and engage with, because there's lots of myths and stories. Even I'm a little bit with Joshua. I think the Bible uses fantasy and myth as a way to share stories too. Talking snake, you have dragon at the end of Revelation, you have Leviathan. There's certain embodiment in terms of monster myth, fantasy to help articulate or embody a reality that we're all experiencing in the world. So I think it even leans into that genre. If the Bible is a library of books with different genre, poetry, art, history, and even fantasy, that whole library can help embody for us and help us understand what reality is and God's posture towards us as creative beings.
Hey guys, Christian here. Have you ever wondered why you should become a patron? Well, let me help you out. Because if you become a patron, what you can do is have live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup, Drinks with Teachers, Manga Mustard, and a companion series that go along with our annual theme. You can be there live, commenting with us. We really want you there. You also get access to exclusive merch. We have t-shirts, mugs, handbags, long sleeve shirts, all over the place for you, for your help in helping us. Also, we have extra bonus questions for you to look at. We have 4 to 8 times a month doing that. We have exclusive Discord channels for you, discounts at our store, access to any future D&D campaigns, and you can easily access all the patron content through our Spotify page at the top where it says exclusive content for subscribers. Also, one of the new things we're adding is voting privileges for future episode topics. We're going to be doing specific things for you, voted by the patrons. And you also get that extra satisfaction of just helping us out. And we appreciate all you do.
Yes, Joshua.
May I have the Uno reverse card, please?
You can use it.
I have a question.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. So for a long time, I heard the reason why Christians were okay with Lord of the Rings and not Harry Potter was basically due to where the magic comes from. In Lord of the Rings, there is a source where they're getting their magic. They're invoking the power of Eru Iluvatar or whoever. Whereas Harry Potter, it's coming either from yourself or whatever. And sometimes a lot of magic even is said to come from demons and that kind of thing. So it really depends on, is your magic coming from a higher godly power or not from a power, on whether or not Christians are okay with it, from what I was told. How would y'all respond to that kind of idea?
And I would say, yeah, I can understand that point of view, but also, how are you going to know it if you don't read the source material? To be able
you
to
read up until you're like, that doesn't say Eru Iluvatar, throw it in the trash.
Yeah, I think you can read that and then kind of or engage with it, whether it's audiobooks or stories on anime or movies or
Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, even that. Like, how are you going to, if you don't engage with it, understand it? If you can't handle it, it's not like you have to do all things. If you can't handle horror, don't watch horror. But if that's something that helps you and discern and process life and faith, then go for it.
Yeah, I'd say that's based on a faulty assumption. The idea of if somehow people were able to channel magic in some way, shape, or form, would that be a natural thing? It's something that's possible for a human being. That's part of creation in that instance. And then it would be a chance of how are you utilizing that ability? That's where I would have an issue with that specific person. Are they using it for the betterment of others? Are they using it for the betterment of self, for the detriment of others? That's where I would have.
So what if
just
to help draw these lines? Okay, so Harry Potter, it's natural, so you could say that came from God because it's part of his natural ability. They're not summoning a demon or something when they do magic. They're just conjuring up, because the good wizards don't even need the words; they just can do it. And then you got Lord of the Rings; they're invoking Eru Iluvatar or the power of the trees or whatever. What about specifically Sam from Supernatural is invoking demon blood to use magic, but he's trying to do it for good, but he's invoking a demon. So where do you fall on, like, I can't watch that? Like, I know you watch it.
Yeah, I can watch it, but I can criticize him for making the choices he makes.
Okay.
And the source, he is good, but he's taking it from a source that is never going to create good.
So what you're saying is, at least in that instance, him making the pragmatic choice where he's just doing utilitarianism was that wrong?
Because it wasn't utilitarian, because it was all about Sam.
There wasn't until he started saying it that I was like, wait a minute, that's my argument against utilitarianism.
Except it wasn't, because it was all about Sam and his pride versus actually helping people.
Back on topic for fantasy, not supernatural. I will say the whole idea of world building, there's a differentiation, here I can say that word, of like sci-fi. It's like speculative fiction to look towards the future, and perhaps some of the technology and things. There's some tropes and tools they use to do science fiction, and fantasy uses other kind of tools and tropes to help build that. There is some overlap when it comes to some of those things. You can have sci-fi versus Star Wars. We talked about kind of the difference of sci-fi and high fantasy, science fiction, fantasy. But I think this genre, again, we at Systematic Ecology are anti-book banning, movie banning. We those things are out there, and you can choose to discern what you want to engage with or not in terms of what you can handle and where you are in your particular moment in life and journey and faith. But that's why we're here and do these kind of things to help process it, to think through it, think critically, also lift up the parts that we think are helpful and edifying, that help human flourishing and understanding who we are. So that's kind of where we are with this. Josh, we have one more thought, and then we move on to the next thing.
I was just adding on to some of what you said.
Okay, go for it.
There's historic fiction, there's sci-fi, and then fantasy. Historic fiction, a lot of Alexander Hamilton. A lot of that stuff was inaccurate, but it was still based on history. So I would call that historic fiction. Christian probably has other examples that are better than mine. Anything Stephen Pressfield writes is historic fiction, and it's wonderful. Science fiction and science fantasy, one of the big differences is that same thing, though, because Star Wars is assuming a different universe. We're playing in a different world. Yeah. So a lot of our fantasy stories, it's a different world. We don't have to worry about our politics here, what might happen, what might not happen. We're just playing in a whole different world, so we don't have to worry about our troubles on this planet and our reality. Whereas Star Trek, it's assuming our reality happened, and here's what could be the future.
Hundreds of years in the future. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And you can even look at like Disney. A lot of what Disney has taken and put on the screen and animation come from kind of fantasy, fair, good versus evil ethics, morality plays, those kinds of things. So yeah, cool. We also like fantasy genre. So all right, the next bit that we are going to do is we're going to list our three without any follow-up. We're just going to list our three, up to three, if it's just one, if it's two, or three, your favorite fantasy stories. It's a long list. Again, you can Google top 100 fantasy stories of all time, and you can agree or disagree what they list there. But for us personally, as hosts, what are some of our favorite fantasy stories? Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. What do you got? What are you coming at us with?
I have to go and pay homage to high school Liz. Twilight.
Okay, there we go. Coming right out with Twilight. Yes, Twilight.
Out of 10.
No follow-ups. We're just going to do. Okay, Twilight, Harry Potter, House Moving Castle. What is House Moving Castle? I'm not familiar with that. Fantasy novel. Cool. Okay, nice. Okay, good. Those are three. No follow-up. We'll follow up later. All right, Christian, what do you got?
I had to take two off the list because it's not fair for Return of the Jedi and KOTOR 2 to be on here. They outpace everything else. But I actually put down the Dresden Files as a series, which we're actually going to cover in a month, actually 2 months, TJ and I at least. And then after that, I have Full Metal Alchemist and my last one, which is why I wrote this down, so that I would not forget it. I'm putting down Elder Scrolls / just Skyrim in general.
All right. And so just to be clear, some of those are not like novels, but some of those are movies or video
I
games.
thought it had to be fantasy novels.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about novels and stories, but we can go into all reading, all genres, just stories in general. So yeah. So we could. Would you change yours, Elizabeth? if you had, does that make a difference and would change your list? Okay, good. I'm gonna stick with novels too. I think there's definitely movies and games and even role playing games that could be fun to put on the list. But I'm gonna stick with novels. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say top one, all of any Tolkien. So the Tolkien world, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, Return of the King, the Silmarillion, like that's there as the OG of what formed and shaped in terms of how I understand fantasy. And then before that, I'm gonna say Narnia, all of Narnia, those stories. That was kind of the first one I engaged with, even just reading as a kid. That then led to The Hobbit, then led to those things. And then, man, there's so many things I could have chosen or pulled from, but I'm gonna say The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, an amazing book. I wish he finished the third. I wish they make it into a TV show or a movie. Maybe at some point. There are rumors they were, but then the pandemic happened, and he really loves playing Dungeons and Dragons and is not writing. So that's Patrick. If you're listening to this, I understand, dude. It's super fun, but yeah, let's do a writing retreat together. I don't know, but that's who. And at some point, TJ and I are gonna talk about that book on an episode at some point in the future. Yep. Christian, be on board with that. Anybody else who wants to join? So those are my three. Joshua, what you got?
Well, like Christian, I'm going to cheat and disclude some things. Primarily, I do feel the need to disclude Lord of the Rings and Star Wars because they're too good. Nothing else really compares to the Silmarillion, and like that would be pointless. Otherwise, all three picks would have to be that: be Silmarillion, The Fall of Numenor, Lord of the Rings. But if I'm discluding Tolkien out of necessity to make it fair, also have to disclude The Hunger of the Dust by G. Willow Wilson because it's not finished. So I feel like it would be unfair to pick an unfinished work. So my three, Middle West, Scotty Young. Fantastic story. That's one I just read it last year and
you're
still
doing a follow-up.
I've already read it a bunch of times.
Yeah, just list.
I'm not doing a follow-up. I'm just telling my list. That's the whole title.
Okay.
They all have at least 5 sentences. No. Each title has an explanation in it. It's fine. What was after that? Now I was actually also going to pick Elder Scrolls. Yeah,
that's a video game.
Is correct. Yes. Okay. The last one is The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson.
Is that a novel, a graphic novel?
Yeah, that's a novel that she did, and it was phenomenal. It's a religious fantasy. Yeah,
nice.
Religious fantasy, I'd say.
There you go. There's our list of what we would choose. Of course, you could online listeners, message boards, DM if we're missing something. But of course, I had to nail it down to 3 because if we said top 10, we'd be here all day and I'd be hungry and blood sugar would go down. So, but out of our 3, of course, there's things we can lift up. I'm surprised Harry Potter didn't get on the list. I'm surprised you did say Harry Potter. I thought you would say, sorry. We started with that. Mistborn from that's Brandon Sanderson. Have you read those, Christian?
Oh, TJ thought that from Spartanburg. That was one of his thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mistborn?
Yeah, he thought that answer.
He thought that answer. All right. And then the deed of, I'm going to say this wrong, Paxenarian, which is also Elizabeth Moon, a friend of Beer Camp and the Geek Stage. Donna Bowman is huge into that fantasy world, and I bought it off online for really cheap, and it is a pretty cool fantasy novel, female heroine protagonist. So cool. All right, we're going to go down the line now. We're going to pick one out of our 3, and Elizabeth, you can pick Harry Potter. Since I told him, I promise you I was listening. Pick why is that one of now the follow up? Why did you, out of your 3, pick one that you want to share why that's important and why it's one of your favorite fantasy stories?
Well, I was going to pick House Moving Castle, but now just on principle, I'm going to talk about Harry Potter.
Yeah, nail it.
Just saying. Now, I've always loved the magical fantasy, like the wizarding and just something where you can have powers to make your life easier.
Yeah.
Like Arculus Vapero. Like, how handy would that be?
Yeah.
Like, I just think of things that would make my life better, and magic would.
Boom. I love it.
Out of those, I'll choose Full Metal Alchemist. It's one of the oldest animes I got into starting off, and it was really engaged with like the magic system of the alchemy and how things you have to have specific ingredients to make things work. There's inherent scientific magic to it, where if you don't follow things correctly, then it's not going to happen. And then you've also got the whole idea of human transmutation. Are you able to bring someone back to life? And the different character interplays there are with the entire thing, and what is good, what is evil. I really enjoy this series. It's one of my top 10 for a reason, anime wise.
Nice. I love that. And again, like the whole like idea of magic making our life easier or be fun. That's the reason why I like comics and superheroes. There's powers, there's magic, there's extra abilities, extraordinary supernatural abilities that you're called to navigate. And I think that's why we love these worlds and worlds that we like to dive into, because it helps us think through like what would we do in that particular situation. Whereas I would also say that it also helps us in how we think through the gifts that we do have in this world and how we use them. With great power comes great responsibility, right? With great magic, how do you use it for your benefit or selfish means, or by which to help others? And so we do have those gifts now. I'm gonna get off my little soapbox and sermoning here in a moment, but I think that's why these stories are so fun to help us think through the gifts that we really do have and the responsibility that we have with it. It'd be too easy for me to pick Narnia, too easy to pick Lord of the Rings. So I'm going to say The Name of the Wind, because I think it's a mixture of this kind of world that he builds is supernatural. It doesn't have like technology. It is high fantasy. There's swords and there's monsters and things, but there's a certain sense of magic to this world that he creates is a little different than others. What is the particular magic called? Do you remember? It's like, it's not alchemy, but you create like a connection between another thing. So it is like a Harry Potter meets Princess Bride meets Lord of the Rings kind of book is how I describe it to people. But the magic in this world isn't necessarily with a magic wand or conjure up a spell from a book. You have to learn it in a school and get better at it, similar to Harry Potter, but you have to learn. You don't just wake up with it. You have to learn it and train in it, and think about how you use it in the world with real world consequences in this book. And there's music and family and friendship, and it's just a really fantastic, well written book, and love it so much. So we'll get. You're not seeing it. Like, again, it's been a while since I've read it. I think I'm going to listen to the audiobook next. I want to reread it, but I don't have the time to sit down and read it. Sympathy. Yeah, you're creating sympathy through two particular objects, whether it's like a piece of somebody's hair and a coin that you have, and what are the chemical makeup between the two that creates sympathy between the two, and how you have control over it. So The Name of the Wind, the big gist of this book is knowing the name of something gives you control over it. And there's some of that biblically in the Hebrew understanding in terms of name. That's why God cast God's name on the Israelites, because there's power in that. So, but this idea of sympathy between two objects to give you power and control over it is a really cool, neat idea, and how that's played out in the story. So there you go. Joshua, what are you going to pick out of yours and why?
I think I'm going to go with Middle West. Scotty Young's Middle West. Partially because it kind of
graphic novel, comic.
Yes.
Yep.
What was I saying? Partially because it subverts a lot of your expectations. Like, it's not just, oh, hey, here's the wizards, the elves, and the dwarves. It's a kind of a different type of fantasy. You do have some trolls and some goblins and stuff, which is cool. Some shadow creatures. The thing that's fun, the thing that pulls me into it, I guess would be the better way of saying it. He does go on an adventure, a lot like when Tolkien talks about what fantasy should be. It involves going out, not staying at a school, for example, of wizards. That would be lame. But going out, doing an adventure, and then coming back. And he thinks the real tell is not just in the adventure itself, but why they come back. So that's some of like what Tolkien talks about and why he writes his stories the way that he does. And you kind of see that in Middle West in a really unique way, where the dad has his own sort of monster. I don't want to spoil too much because you should read it. But he has his own kind of monster, so the son's running away from that at first. And then he learns that he can find out more about his past and actually learns why his dad is the way he is. And then learns a lot of times you have where like the reconciliation when the dad's the bad guy, a lot of times ends up being you either defeat your dad or you learn to forgive your dad. But he here learns that he has that same monster, that he has parts of that in him as well. And not only has to reconcile with his own father, but has to reconcile with that part in himself. And I think that part of the story, reconciling that your dad got it from somewhere. He isn't just this own creature on his own being, but also he had the past and you have a past that's leading you to become that as well. So you have to reconcile both with your past, your dad's past, and yourself. It's not just a self-contained, oh, let me forgive this one person. Everyone has relationships.
So we're all in a process of becoming.
Yeah,
We're entangled.
Entangled with
We're
one another.
entangled. Yeah, there's a drinking game at my church. Every time I say entangled, people
Entangled process of
take a
becoming.
little shot of wine at communion
And
or
of
something.
course, Dark Wizards also is probably something you say a lot.
I don't know if I say dark
Wonderful
wizards
bit.
a lot. I do say entangled a lot. That's right. That's right. But yeah, I think a good point about talking how he defines it. He wrote a whole essay on fairy tales, and so
good.
he talks about articulating why he writes these stories and how they're beneficial. And I think Madeline Engel also has a book in terms of her writing process and what it means and to be a Christian in faith and storyteller. So I highly recommend those two books. And if you want to go deeper, why fantasy? Why fairy tales? Why do we do this thing? All good answers, all great stuff, good things. All right. So now the next step. If we, outside of our top three, if there's a deep cut, it could be anything, it could be stories, could be novels, could be anime, could be whatever. If there is something that people don't necessarily think of fantasy when they think of fantasy, is there a deep cut story out there that you would consider underneath that circus tent of fantasy stories? And then why do you choose the deep cut? And so, Christian, I'm going to go with you first.
I'm going to choose Stephen King's Heart's Atlantis. This is a group of different novellas and short stories where it's more magical realism, but since it is also tied into his larger cosmos, it has fantasy elements inside of it. And that's one I don't think people would typically think of. And I think they'd go with The Dark Tower as fantasy, as that's part of it. And this is tied into that. And that's what makes part of this book fantasy. But it's the idea of kids in college during Vietnam, like losing the will to stay in school because there's like this magnetic draw towards a game that they're playing. And that causes them to drop out and then be sent to Vietnam. And then you have a kid who finds a guy who appears to be a psychic of some sort, who is sought by these men in yellow coats who are not really men. They're this weird kind of thing that's like leading into further things about the Stephen King mythos. And bringing that all together to show like the human element of friendship, what it means for us to bond together, to learn who we are. So yeah, my choice would be Hearts in Atlantis.
Nice. All those virtues. Elizabeth, where are you going? Where are you going with this?
Going
We've already heard about Harry Potter. No.
Well, the worst is for last. So I'm going to talk about Orange, which is an anime that is usually just a slice of life school anime. And the only thing fantasy about it would be they wrote a letter to their past selves trying to change the future.
Oh, nice.
So I don't want to give any spoilers because like this anime, like it captivated me when I like.
It's called Orange.
Orange.
Okay. Do
It's
oranges
so
show up?
good.
The color orange? Why is it called orange?
It's just called Orange.
Okay, got it.
Okay, it was like he was drinking orange juice at one point.
Gotcha.
So
I love it. There you go.
I mean, who doesn't love a good glass of orange juice? Am I right?
Yeah, my blood sugar's
But
up.
it was just so, and that's really it. Like she gets a letter from her past self, and so she's going throughout her day. She's like, "Wait,
Fantastic.
This letter is real." And so then she's just trying to follow the directions of her future self to try and prevent an awful scenario. And it's like it's gut wrenching. I cried. I laughed. It's
Fantastic.
pretty much a novella.
Well, by what means can we consume this story? Where is it? What device or where is
I'm
it?
pretty sure it's on Netflix, Crunchyroll. Just Google Orange Anime. I watched it in a day.
Okay. I love that. That's actually a tool that like I've used before for folks at camp and stuff to say, all right, you're writing yourself a note from like somebody 10 years from now or 5 years from now. What would you tell yourself? And maybe you could time capsule it, put it somewhere and then pick it up later. Like what's advice that you would give to yourself? That's a good thought experiment in terms of thinking through those things. And one of the things I loved about the creative aspect of the pandemic, there were those videos of going around of talking to people yourself, like in 2019 from 2021, like you're not going to believe what's going down. Those kind of dialogues back and forth of just people a couple years out from each other, not believing what's going on in the world, I think is also a very helpful thought experiment. That sounds like a fantastic story, and I will look that one up. Cool. I will go last since I will be the worst at this. So Joshua, go there.
Would you believe that I had like a similar experience? I had a friend because he worked in labs who early 2020, when I got married in February, was like, "Hey, the whole world's going to shut down. You should get bread and milk," and kept telling me things. I was like, "Yeah, buddy, sure."
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, my wife was the same. She's watching the CDC like breakdown of what could happen, and she was predicting like every 5 months what was going to happen in 5 months. I was like, dude, how are you finding this?
So I was going to say George MacDonald because his fairy stories kind of inspired Lewis and Tolkien, but I actually have a question about what classifies as fantasy.
We did talk about that earlier.
just something that involves Trinity magic, the magic of the heart, darkness coming alive, and keys unlocking the universe count as fantasy?
Where's my drink? I don't have a drink here.
Does that
Where's
count
my
as,
drink?
Does that count as fantasy?
At lunch,
So we'll
at
be
lunch, I'm going to
restarting
pound
this
3 beers.
episode.
Because next reporting, I'm going to be like just smashed.
Can
with
we
Kingdom Hearts.
restart the recording? I have a new
Okay.
pick.
Okay.
All 3 of my picks are now Kingdom Hearts, and Kingdom Hearts.
Drink. 3. That's 3 pints.
Specifically, let's see. Kingdom Hearts, Birth by Sleep, Kingdom Hearts 358 by 2, and in the original Kingdom Hearts are my 3 picks. The one I want to expand on is the original Kingdom Hearts because he thought that the key was going to be in Kyrie's heart, but it was actually in friendship. And friendship
There's
is
a
what
timer.
allows
Get
him
out.
to overcome the darkness in the community, and how we're all entangled allows us to do this process of becoming, to overcome the darkness, find the Kingdom of Hearts, and pursue light, not to completely vanquish the darkness, but to pursue a better universe.
Sounds like a very deep fantasy story that all people should get into. Thank you for that. Mammy, he should have gone last, Elizabeth. You're right.
I'm sorry. I didn't like. I literally, while you were talking, something you said, I was like, "Wait a minute, friendship, magic, Trinity. What? Wait, why didn't I?"
Yeah. All right. So my deep cut. I don't know if people will classify this, but when I looked up all the lists, the best fantasy stories and stories out there, then we have a loose definition. It's A Wrinkle in Time, Madeline Engel. We've talked about it before. It's one of the first books I really read all the way through. I remember reading all the way through as a kid. And it has the sci-fi. It has the faith and science aspect. It has fantasy and angels. So that's probably a deep cut. But I'm going to divert now. Now I'm going to say that's not my pick. But I will say American Gods by Neil Gaiman, because this story I think embodies, in terms of where we place our worship and the idolatry and kind of the American nature, the old gods being deconstructed, disbelieved, no faith in, and then the new gods of capitalism and TV and lust and all those things, like those are becoming the gods that are around us and how they power. I think the false dichotomy is that God is God unto God's self, regardless of the worship we place on God. But in this particular story, Odin is empowered by the worship of others, and so when that is taken away, Odin loses power and those kinds of things. Whereas we would say God is sovereign regardless of what we think or do to begin with. But I do think it's a good thought experiment in terms of how we understand religion, how we understand gods, what are idols that we pay attention to, those kinds of things. So they did make it into a show. I don't know if I watched it. Did I watch it? I did not think. But the book I read over my sabbatical a few years back and really, really loved it. And so I will. Any other things, follow-up stories that we're forgetting?
So Kingdom Hearts 2, Kingdom Hearts 3.
Mute his mic, Austin. Austin, please come here. Do what you can. Why are you sitting way over there, Austin? Mute his mic. Save us. You're our only hope. There is a hologram of Austin. If he wasn't here, there'd be a hologram coming out of a water bottle to tell us that but they might have known us from a previous Obi-Wan Kenobi
My
TV
only
show.
question is, how much better is Kingdom Hearts than Lord of the Rings?
That's right.
I just said that for Nick.
Baiting
Nick,
to try and get those hearts and likes on our hate likes, hate comments. But cool. I think it's good discussion. Great stories. Of course, we're leaving some things out. There's a lot of great stories out there. Let us know what your favorite fantasy stories are. If there's a story that we haven't talked about yet on this episode or others that you'd like us to have an episode on or join us to be a part of it, let us know. We'd be happy to do that. And so to close up, I know this has opened up another can of worms, but we do have like snack and drink that we need to get to. But going, we are geekologists. We like to go deeper. Again, distract us and how we understand or grow in our faith. Of course, humans have a great gift of turning tools into weapons, of turning things that are helpful into our lives and beneficial and fun into idols. And of course, we can do that with our stories and fandom as well. But what is it about these stories that could help or distract that we need to be wary of, but also lean into? All right, Joshua, you can go first this time.
Thanks.
Make Elizabeth go last.
So I think that there are distractions, and this is, again, I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I think it's almost as good as Kingdom Hearts. You can obsess. You can obsess over the Lord. I know people who have little statues, who have all the weapons of all the different people, who And to an extent, you can do that and just have fun. But some people, I think, it becomes so consuming.
Yeah,
that can be a real problem. Actually, that you're not living your life. You're not out there making the connections that the story's telling you about in the first place. And then pointing to the Middle West, because that's what I actually chose.
Did you?
I think the way it's helpful for me personally, just my own experience, I tend to compartmentalize. I can't say the word. Christian, help me. I did say it. It's just a terrible word. It sounds bad.
It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite words of all time.
I tend to do that though, because like for me, if for some reason I was in the same situation as the character in that book, I think of it as, okay, I have to reconcile my own what monster I am with myself, and then also I need to learn about my past, and then also I need to forgive my father. I don't think of these as all things are intertangled and address them all at once. I'm thinking, let me do this, and then I'll focus on this part of my life, and then I'll focus on this. And I feel like maybe it's a little bit healthier to see it all as one big picture and kind of just accept what it is. And I don't think I could have come to that if I didn't have this story that was so outside of my reality. And also the way that comic issues are, like you're left hanging each time. And you're like, oh man, well, how's that going to unpack? And then you see it all come together and you're like, oh, wait, that's real life. And that's, I don't know, that hit me. So I think taking the story for what it is can be helpful.
Yeah.
Taking it further can be distracting.
And we've said that here and other places and in conventions and panels and Theology Beer Camp, is that sometimes these stories and the Geek Stage and things we put under the Geek Stage, underneath the umbrella, help disarm us and let our guard down a little bit so that we can accept and look at a story from a different angle. And I think that's kind of what's beneficial of these. Just got a little bit more to that, but I think that's a fantastic point. Christian, you're up.
Yeah, sure thing. But just like anything in reality, you can use these stories for great good or great evil, depending on how you utilize them. And it's a good thing to be able to engage with stories. It's a good thing to read them. It's not a good thing if that's the only thing you do. If the only interactions you have with other people is if they're imaginary. It's like, look, I love getting into a book or an anime or a movie or what have you and just losing myself to it temporarily.
So skipping class multiple weeks in a row for Skyrim was wrong?
That would be the wrong choice. Yes.
That's part of Elder Scrolls, by the way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So anytime that I do that, and I have also done the same.
I think we did it together.
Yes, that would be an evil because I am not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not interacting with the people God has placed in my life. But there's nothing wrong with engaging in that book or story or whatever in the first place, because it can help you connect with people. It can help you understand things you never would have done if someone had not written it down in a way that helped you grasp that concept. I mean, one of my big formative works that I read was the Star Wars New Jedi Order book, Traitor. And it helped shape a lot of my early philosophy as a kid. When I started reading it, it's like, oh, I'd never thought of using the Force this way. I never thought, well, what do I do with my actions? How do they affect other people? So if you utilize books that way, perfectly fine. If that's all you do, there's a huge issue because you're denying that social aspect of being human. And as much as I hate doing that at times, I can't be a total introvert that's a lone wolf Christian. That's not what I'm designed to do.
So I am able to take Skyrim and use it to express my frustrations with the world and just slaughter some else.
Temperance, Joshua. But it sounds like Christian has had a good seminary experience because he's focusing on people. Yeah, I think when when you use that excuse to detach from real human beings, then it can be horrible. Escapism is fine. You need that introvert time. You need that Sabbath. You need that time away. You need a place where you can go and feel safe and belong. But if that keeps you from being with other people in reality, then that's where it can go. Elizabeth, go for it. I'll be last because I got another thing. What you got? What could be helpful about these things, or could distract or be harmful that we haven't said already?
So of course, if you just try to escape your problems and almost like medicate with anime or medicate with fantasy, that's not okay. But also, I always, especially in the church setting, who am I bringing with me in anything I do? So in the next week, I have some friends coming over and we're going to watch Spirited Away, my favorite Ghibli movie. Well, I've had other people in the church and I'm like, hey, do you guys just want to come together for an anime night? And so how can you share it with you? Kind of like what Christian was going with the community. So you don't have to make it like this weird, I'm going to be in my basement with my little figurines. Like, you don't have to make it.
Don't make it weird.
Don't make it weird.
Don't make it weird, y'all. That was good pastoral advice.
Don't make it weird, Matthew Christian, actually.
But so, but what Will was saying, you need that escape. And like I said earlier, it helps with anxiety. It helps with just being able to have that like dopamine rush, if you will. And it's really harmless if you do it in moderation. But so is ice cream. You can make anything bad, even if it's good.
Also, real quick, next month, one of our double issue episodes, we have a ton of hosts on, is going to be to talk about Spirited Away. So that's going to be, you mentioned.
I think I'm talking about ice cream. Maybe we can talk about ice cream.
Ice cream episode coming
Ice
up.
cream is coming out. Ice cream man.
I just went to the ice cream
Drinks
museum.
with tea, just melted ice cream.
Yeah, I echo all those things. And again, like, is how we're being good stewards of these stories that are entrusted to us or that we love and want to share with others. And I think that aspect of community is why we do Systematic Geekology. It's why I started a God Love Geeks book club at my church. I think it's, we think about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all that they contributed to the fantasy genre. They did it in community. They had the inklings. They gathered at a bar and had pints, and they workshopped it. They criticized others. They were there for each other. They helped them each other think through these stories and workshop these stories together in community. And really, that's what we're doing with Systematic Geekology. We are the inklings of the geek world. That sounded very pompous, but they modeled for us how to do that, and that's why we do things like Theology Beer Camp. That's why we go to Comic-Cons and do things in panels. We love our fandom, we love our stories, we love these things, but we also do it in community. And so, I kind of look at Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and what they did with the Inklings and how they gathered and processed their stories individually and as a part of friendship and even within their arguments and how they impacted one another. That's what we do in this community with Systematic Geekology and other ways we do in our communities and communities of faith. So that's how I kind of wanted to end this, to think through it. And it was on my outline, but the conversation we had here wasn't necessarily something I thought that others would bring up. And the fact that we're all on the same page with that is why we do things like that. Meet in person, grab lunch together, talk about our favorite stories, pick on each other, hold each other accountable, and then lift each other up as brothers and sisters in Christ. Yeah. Well, thanks, y'all. Thanks for listening. This was fun. Again, any one of these stories and novels, animes, video games, except Kingdom Hearts, it could be issue. We could do a whole episode alone on it. And I think we have on some of these.
So many more episodes.
We had a lot more episodes. But thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with us. We know there are a lot of options out there in podcasts and consuming stories, but we're glad that you're part of our community. Let us know who you are. Let us know what you're geeking out on. When we're at an in-person event or at a Comic-Con or Theology Beer Camp, we hope that you come join us and let us know that you listen to us, and we'll give you a high five and maybe give you a shirt. Joshua will give you the shirt off his back. If he's wearing a Systematic Geek, I make that promise right now, that he will take it off his back and give it to you. Yeah, exactly. And that's a good image. And I will say we're on YouTube and there is this challenge out there. I think our highest YouTube like count is up to like 18 or 20. I think it's Star Wars and Star Trek. And then there's Godzilla -1 because I think people think they are clicking on the movie for free. But hey, we have a lot of clicks on that. But if we get to 50 likes on any one of our YouTube videos, I promise there'll be a video of me frolicking through flowers, not with my shirt off, but I will maybe wear a tank top. I might wear a tank top, and I will frolic in the flowers, and that will be one of our stories. I promise you will come to you. But we got to get 50 likes out there on one of these videos, and reasonable goals. And I'm gonna let Joshua, since he's one of the founders and co-founders of Systematic Geekology, he's gonna do the sign off because I always forget how it's done.
My recommendation is to read more George MacDonald, because that's the fantasy that inspired most of the other fantasies we talked about today, especially if you're going like Lewis and Tolkien. And if we're talking about like the Inklings, that's what they geeked out on. That's what their podcast would have been about.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. This whole episode was a bunch of recommendations. So, but I think that was a good good tie-in.
I just wanted to, because you mentioned the Inklings, and I was like, I could imagine Lewis and Tolkien. If they did a podcast, it would have been about George MacDonald.
They would have exactly. That would have been one of their episodes.
And with that, remember, we're all a chosen people. Geek them up first.
Wah, 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 wah.
Maybe the geek in me recognize the geek in you, or that's something.
It's one of those. Peace. I'm gonna go drink. Hello, friends. If you enjoy systematic ecology, a great way to support us and to keep us moving forward into the future is to be a patron on our Patreon network. If you're a Patreon, then you get live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup and Manga Mustard, Drinks with Tejas, and also some extra content there with our companion series to go along with our annual theme. If you're a patron, you get exclusive merch like t-shirts and handbags and mugs. There's also a bonus extra question that has extra content. In each episode, we go deeper into our faith and the questions that we're wrestling with, but we also do this extra question to jump in and share about, and patrons get to hear how we answer that question. There's discounts on our store. You get access to any future online D&D campaigns. You can easily access all of our Patreon content through our Spotify page where it says exclusive content for subscribers. That could be you folks. And all that being said, you get the satisfaction that you help us keep the lights on and keep us moving forward with our software, our marketing, our equipment, staying current in the podcast game. We love systematic ecology. We hope you do too. Support us moving forward. Thank you for all that you are. We know there's a lot of great choices and content out there, and you choose to listen to systematic ecology. Thanks, folks. We love you. Peace.
Hi, my name is TJ, and I'm here to tell you about the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network. We have a bunch of shows on AMP. You can follow the entire network in a single feed on Spotify at Anazal Ministry Podcasts or on the network page on Apple Podcasts. Some of the ones we're running right now are The Homily, which is Pastor Will's homily messages from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill. We have the Whole Church Podcast, which one of my favorites. It's where myself and Joshua we interview leaders from different denominations and backgrounds to work for a full church unity, Big C. We have My Seminary Life by Brandon Knight, former host on Systematic Ecology. He discusses his experience at seminary and discusses seminary topics so anyone can access the knowledge, which is kind of cool. It's like the book, Everything You Learn at Business School and then Everything You Don't Learn at Business School. It's great. We have Let Nothing Move You by Christian Ashley. He goes through the Bible kind of like it's a Bible study to explain the biblical narrative through his perspective and what he's learned. Dummy for Theology, which is Joshua's show, he discusses various theological topics in an attempt to show every side of big discussions. That leaves you with more questions than answers, which everyone loves a lot. It's kind of a continuation of a series that we did on Whole Church, but it's really good. It's really fun. We have the Bible After Hours, where the foul-mouthed preacher goes through the Bible from a progressive view to challenge the status quo of the modern church. I love that one. If you're from a more conservative background, that one I find will probably be the most helpful for you. Definitely check that out. And we have the Clydes. Taylor and Elizabeth Clyde go through weekly discussions in a devotional, conversational method to help us get closer to one another and God. That's just a little review of what we do in AMP and all of our other shows. So check that out, get subscribed, and just start getting all that free content, you know?